Thanks, Mark, for inviting me. As Mark already said, I've worked at the European Commission for more than 30 years. The European Commission is the executive of the European Union. And so indeed I worked from the inside, dealing mostly with, well, first with globalization and the economies of member states. My background is sort of hardcore economics. But one of the things I learned at the European Commission is that you cannot understand European integration with economics alone. You need to talk about history and political science, because economics is a wonderful science, but it needs context, and the context is always historical and political. And you ignore that at your peril. So European integration so far actually has been one of the most successful, enduring peace projects in the world so far. After 67 years of integration, starting with the Treaty of Rome in 1958, it has been incredibly successful, and the EU, despite crisis, because personally I cannot recall a time when there were no crises in the EU during my entire career, and before and no doubt after as well. And the EU exists not despite crisis, but because of crisis. It deals with crisis in a way that is much more difficult to deal with by any of the member states alone. And don't forget, most of the crises we have nothing to do with the EU. Climate, the US, China, Russia, immigration. That's more of a political and economic crisis, if anything. But all of these crises would have occurred without the EU. And the idea is, the thinking is that with the EU, for the member states, it is always easier to jointly work on this together, because you have to deal with it one way or the other, and you try to minimize the impact and help each other out. There is still this sense of solidarity of the EU, although it is under threat. There's no question about it. Now, European integration, and unlike the past, which was extremely bloody, which was basically military enforced based on a philosophy or an ideology of superiority, modern integration is extremely different. It is above all economic integration, this is the internal market, within the framework of a set of rules, and Europeans love rules. The only problem, there was never a problem there, the only problem was who makes the rules, because my rule obviously is better than your rule, so we should all follow my rule. That's very European thinking. And there's a way out of that, European solutions, I'm not going to talk about that now. So it's above all integration within a framework of rules. The rule of law is extremely important, always has been, and is clearly under threat within the EU as well. And the third thing is, of course, the whole project is extremely political. Economics is a means to an end. It's a very powerful means, but it's a means to an end. And the official objective of the EU, as it states in the treaties, is ever closer union among the peoples of Europe. Which sounds wonderful, which doesn't mean much, but it sets a tone, so to speak. Because ever closer union, how does that mean? What does that mean? It means whatever the member states want it to mean. But let's put it this way, crises usually push integration further. And the contrast with most people thinking about this, that crises make things fall apart. And so far that hasn't worked in the EU. And there's many, many examples of this, both in economics, think of the COVID crisis, the economic crisis we had. Basically every crisis tends to bring member states together. Now, the thing is though, that I work personally on enlargement, which is one dimension of European integration, a very powerful dimension. And the thing is that Europe, I think, is defined by diversity in every possible aspect, in culture, in language, in regions. You live in the same country, but you go to another region and their accent is completely different. That's very European. I'm not saying it's only European, but it is very European. This diversity is not a weakness, as many often tend to think, both within and outside of the EU. This diversity is a strength. And it needs protection. Why is it a strength? Because it provides a different ways of thinking, which also means different ways of dealing with issues. A history of how did we deal with these issues in the past. Just a little example, when Spain, Portugal and Greece entered in 81 and 85, there was a lot of talk among the existing member states that maybe it's not such a good idea to have all these Spanish and Greeks and Portuguese come and take our jobs and take away our women and whatever. That talk never changes. It's just the names that change. The discussion stays the same. The thing is here, though, that we have dealt with all of this in the past. And this is where you come back to history as well. And for an economist, that was quite a revelation. For you as well. Not for any of you, I think, but for an economist, it gives historical context. How did we deal with this in the past? What did we do? What worked? What didn't work? How should we do this better next time? We have this mass of experience that we can draw upon for further integration. And this is not about eradicating your culture, this is about celebrating it. Like I said, European integration is economic integration, which is very different from previous integrations, previous integration efforts. And I can talk a lot about that, go back to the Roman Empire and Reformation, but which is very strange for an economist to talk about, but I'm not going to do that. For now, I just want to say that, like I said earlier, the EU exists not despite crisis, but because of crisis. At the same time, like life itself, democracy and peace are fragile, and they need defending, both from inside and outside. And I'll be happy to listen to the other contributions later today here. And I'm here for you as well to discuss about Europe, European integration, EU issues. I'm here to help you with that as well, so I'm available. So thank you very much.